I'm Dr. David Jubb. We have an incredible show for you today. It's and a lecture this time that we're going to be spending with each other is all about the blood. It's so amazing, you know, because you hardly hear anybody talking much about the blood, do you? I mean, do you really? Huh? I mean, when you go to the hospital, 80 times out of 100, what people go to a physician for generally is for upset tummy sorts of things, digestive disturbance. Digestive disturbance happens to be one of the primary things that actually people end up going to a doctor for, or a health practitioner. And it's so amazing to me, and maybe you as well, that people just generally never really talk about the blood. Could you imagine just for a moment that a red blood cell, for our intensive purposes, like a leaf, or no, imagine it's a petal, a gorgeous, beautiful petal of a rose. And now you can see that gorgeous petal of that rose, and it's fresh, it has a full bouquet, a fragrance, and it has an enormous amount of light, doesn't it? Which it has life. But now imagine that we can slowly dry that rose petal out, and eventually it's sort of just a shade of its former self, isn't it? It becomes so dry and brittle. Matter of fact, if it's just with a little pressure, it's just going to crush to dust once it's dry, isn't it? And we can look and see a leaf on a tree, and when the leaf really does have, as the tree does have its vibrance and things, and as the seasons change, you can see the colour of the leaf slowly change too, until eventually you've got a leaf and it's falling on the ground, and it's just only really a shade of its former self, of what it was. I had the very good fortune in the early 80s, that's not so long ago really, to introduce live blood cell analysis to New York City. Very few people ever had heard of live blood cell analysis, and I did dark field and bright field microscopy, and I was looking at people's blood and observing what you ate and how this affected the blood. And my whole interest very much was in how blood is formed, and I studied the works of some very, very great people in the world. Two people from Russia, very famous, Lapanshovsky, and Tsushima from Japan is another hematologist, which is the study of blood, and hematopoiesis is the word for the study of blood formation. It's going to be a small test after that, after this one. Hematopoiesis. And I studied Gunther Enderlin's work in Germany and Gaston Nasson's work in Quebec. And so from all of this work and my constant observation of things, I could see a theory that formed, and this has the most scientific validity of all theories of how blood is formed and what blood is. And amongst all of the people who actually perhaps know something about blood, perhaps, what you're going to hear today, you're going to be the very first people in New York City that actually has heard what blood is. You can be amongst the very first people to know actually how blood is actually formed. Most of us have been taught apparently that blood is formed somewhere, but that's really not formed where people have thought. Let's just go over a couple things for a moment. Of course, most of us know that, you know, the state of the art at the moment, it's really a little bit like fried sticky fingers, isn't, in the lobby of the hospital, isn't it? Everybody here knows that nutrition and the state of science as far as nutrition is concerned in the hospitals is really poor, very, very poor. So is that not an example of a metaphor of actually what's going on in science? I want you to know that people are making decisions for you and I often, and they are completely unqualified. They're making statements and things about things, and they are completely unqualified. So in 1925, this whole theory about blood getting formed in your long bones got underway. Most people ever since then have sort of thought, oh, well, gee, blood is made in the long bones, in the marrow of your bones. Untrue. In 1925, Cohn, Cunningham and Doan were three scientists, research scientists, that starved some pigeons and some chickens. That's not so good that you would starve pigeons, chickens, is it really? Right? But that's what they did. Not so moral. Anyway, and then they sacrificed those chickens, also not so moral. But they did find some blood in the marrow of these fasting chickens' bones and pigeons. And so they hypothesized, because they found red blood cells in the marrow of the bone, that that's where blood is formed. And so they got underway with this whole idea that blood is formed in the bones, which it can under circumstance of fasting conditions where there's no more material left of your body, and under a state of some siege, the body could break down anything within itself, substrate material of itself, back into blood. Fat cells, under conditions of not eating, the fat that you have on your body is broken down back into blood. This is a brand new insight into biology, and at the moment the science hasn't considered where blood is really formed at all. They have no idea, and they're performing all of these operations, giving people marrow and all sorts of things, thinking that that is going to assist in the creating of blood, which it doesn't. It doesn't at all. So blood, apparently they said it was formed in the long bones. It's not. It's formed in the intestinal villi, in the lamina propria of the intestinal villi, in the large cell, in the mucous membrane of the intestinal tract, primarily. And blood is formed not from DNA, not from cells producing blood or anything like that, not at all. Blood is formed as a result of colloids of life aggregating together, and these aggregates fusing together, and then these fused masses coming together, and then that becomes a blood. That is a blood cell at that point. It's a sort of a sporulation type of process. Now, if you ask doctors where the DNA is in the body, most doctors they should know that, right? But often we shrink a little bit when you ask questions like that, because am I going to answer it correctly? And so I might not put my hand up. I said, "Where's blood made in the? Where's the DNA, in the blood, or where's DNA in the body?" Did you know there is no DNA in the red blood cell? Did you know that from a red blood cell DNA can arise? And it does arise. And this is the most hard science observation that's been done. It doesn't have to have a theory. It is very hard scientifically observed. So in the past, people just thought, oh, you know what, blood's just a gas transporter, that's it. Doesn't really do anything else. And then we say, well, what happens to all the red blood cells? when they're spent. Like, no, we don't know. Oh, And if we look at mitotic cell division as far as DNA synthesis and cell division and this sort of a thing, mitotic division it's called, and if we do look at an assay of all mitotic division of cells of the body, what we come up with is, oh my God, it's not enough to produce the blood cells that are produced every day. It's impossible. It couldn't. Our cells cannot produce the amount of red blood cells that needs to be every day from DNA synthesis. So mast cells and other cells are not the ones that create red blood cells. Now, the old theory sort of said, gee, the mast cell sort of did its little number and then the DNA just like left from the blood cell and now you've got a blood cell. But where's the DNA? It's a very, very shoddy theory, absolutely unscientific completely, but it just goes to show that how people in modern medicine can be just following along with Freud's sticky fingers in the lobby, and modern medicine is completely unqualified, utterly. And I want you to know the bankers and the people who own petroleum and the ones who started foisting poisons on people and saying that they were cancer treatments and they were killing people in the early 1900s, and they got enough money together after they killed so many people with all these poisons. They foisted saying that that was what was needed for cancer, and then they created a refinery, and then they end up owning the bank and all sorts of things, and it's the other ones that's in charge, but we've allowed that. We've allowed that. But I want you to know we've moved into an era where people are standing up and saying, stop, that's not right, that's wrong. And people are saying, wait a minute, you've just recommended that surgery, but, no, I don't think so. Is there an alternative approach? So the idea that blood is just a gas transporter, that's really very limited, and it doesn't explain all the types of things that blood does. So let's think about it just for a moment, and let's visualize for a moment what happens to blood. We're going to talk about it being formed in a moment, but just imagine you've got the red blood cell there, and it's sort of like a beautiful donut shape. It's a gorgeous donut shape, and it's sort of filled in a little bit in the middle rather than being completely hollow in the middle. Or could we say it's like a tyre tube, but it's filled in the middle sort of thing. So it's a rim, and it's sort of like a disc, and thin in the middle. And when you look at it through the microscope, you can easily see through the centre, typically, and then around the edge is a very, very, like the tyre tube itself, and it's very, very red. When blood passes through your lungs, it starts to take on a colour that it never had before. And it's totally different to the colour of blood that hasn't passed through your lungs. And the moment that blood has passed through your lungs and also passed through your heart, and your heart has percussion. That percussion of your heart energizes the blood and causes it to take on a colour which is a gorgeous, gorgeous, beautiful crimson red, and it's a glowing red, and it's actually pulsating and glowing, and it's giving off light. Under the microscope, blood like this has a gorgeous, beautiful halo of light around it, and when blood really is spent, or it's not so working so well, it really looks a bit like a ghost. It looks like a ghost in comparison. So when we look at each other and we look at our friends, our family, you look at yourself in the mirror and things, we can look and we can really see how much light is actually present. And the amount of light actually that's coming out of your body really is the amount of light that's in your blood. It's very, very specific. Our blood is one of the most important organs. It's a tissue organ. Blood is an organ. And it glows, and it causes a light to be shone on the other cells of your body. And the other cells of your body pick up that light from your blood. Blood is more than just a gas transporter. It actually transports light. And so now a lot of people have grown up with the idea that a headache is a Tylenol deficiency, and cancer is a chemotherapy deficiency, and these sorts of things. We've grown up with little bottles in our cabinet and things, and we're taught that that's medicine, which of course, the Native Americans, they just think that's so weird, and they think we're very superstitious because their word for medicine, the direct translation is intention. And so they think to themselves, how could it be somebody would just go and get a bottle from the shelf, and then that's going to be actually what... Did you know that when you get that bottle from the shelf and it has its little effect, that actually you urinate away your light after having consumed that? Did you know that when you consume food which doesn't have any light, it actually causes your blood to less than keep the light that it has? When we bring in material which actually is devoid of light itself, it actually robs light from the body. And typically after aspirin or anything cooked or anything eaten that's not mixed with saliva. If you swallow something that's designed out here, and the people who designed it did not design it for you to complex it properly, it will not really go anywhere. And when it does go somewhere, if it can, it will rob light from your body, and it will draw immune cells from your body. Your immune cells will have to eat that material and conjugate it. Your liver will produce glucuronic acid. It produces glucuronic acid, it conjugates, it latches onto material which is not meant to be in the blood. Your blood is probably the most important integral element to be able to keep clean. And when I began in the early 80s, I started looking at people's blood, and I was pretty shocked actually. I thought we were all pretty clean inside, people's faces looked shaved, and the men's faces look shaved, and other people's faces look really clean. But what was going on inside often was a major serious trash heap. It was incredible. There was garlic acid, uric acid, acetic acid, cholesterol, crystals. There was mold, fungus and yeast and bacteria. There were blood cells that were misshaped, and blood cells that were clumped, and blood that really was not discrete and flowing and having its proper surface exchange. And then as we saw people that cleaned things here and sealed things more in the intestinal tract here, as things became sealed here again, the blood became cleaner even if somebody ate bread, which is not a good food really, right? But when we eat a food which really is not meant for us, and that does get into the blood, that seriously compromises our blood. So now, all people are going around and are thinking, I have to get myself to be more alkaline. And I'm doing all sorts of things that's too acidic. But did you know that actually your blood has become more and more alkaline than it should? It's not so correct as people have been putting it. No. Did you know that your blood becomes more and more alkaline as you get older and get sicker and sicker? If you did. And the tissue of the body becomes more and more acidic. The tissue becomes more acidic, but the blood becomes more and more alkaline, until there's such a disparity between the two. It's such a difference that it's too much of a difference. At the turn of the century, to the 1900s, when we started looking at pH in science, people in Europe's blood was 7.32. And that's pretty much the pH of the blood. It's just a tiny little bit slightly alkaline. And the tissue of the body was 6.8. That's slightly acidic. So it's very close together. That's on a scale of 1 is very acidic, 14 is very alkaline, 7 is neutral. So 1 is very acidic, 7 is neutral, 14 is very alkaline. And now you've got blood around 7.3, just slightly alkaline. And you've got the tissue of your body supposed to be 6.8, and it's just slightly acidic. And the relationship between these two is there's a margin, and health occurs and vitality occurs as you have this margin. It creates a close friction grid in your body that condenses and allows cosmic energy that's pervasive throughout us to be condensed into matter in our cells. Blood is formed from biophotons, tiny little colloids of life, which are made up out of a collection of biophotons. Bio meaning life, photon meaning light. Tiny little wavelengths of light that have coalesced together, weak electromagnetic waves in the visible spectrum that have coalesced together into a donut shape. And these collect together into another donut shape, and that's blood. And the colloid of life has life perpetually, and it's continuously able to tap matter, and electrons are formed, and it's continuously, perpetually, dancing around underneath the microscope, resisting the pull of gravity. And blood is made up out of these colloids of life. And blood comes together as a result of food that you've eaten in times of where you're eating. Food comes in, and as zinc is in the presence of an acid and hydrogen is present, that hydrogen becomes what's called a nascent hydrogen, becomes newly formed hydrogen, becomes an isotope, becomes a very strange, unusual type of hydrogen, and any element next to it is converted to its protons and electrons. So anything you eat, it ends up being broken down into protons and electrons through this process. Not everything, but enough does to actually go to support assisting with blood and this sort of thing formation. Colloids, these protons and electrons from the stomach of food you eat ends up in the small intestine, and these elements start to coalesce and form together into spores, and then those spores fuse together into a mass, and then those fused masses fuse together into a red blood cell. Your red blood cell becomes extravasated outside the capillaries of your body after it's sort of done its job a bit, and there it pools with other red blood cells, and an immune cell can transform itself from that mass. That immune cell can migrate and find its way into the liver, and it can become a Kupffer cell in your liver. It could become a Kupffer cell in your intestine. It has the ability to transmutate itself and into anything that's necessary in the body, and this is a fact. DNA and this idea of all of this and that our cells arose through mitotic cell division is untrue. Our cells did not arise through mitotic cell division, and this is a brand new insight into biology, and this is really like the 22nd century. maybe I'm sort of 40 years ahead of my time talking to people about blood being not just a gas transporter. But if you can come out of here with something, the first thing that you would come away with is that blood is more than just a gas transporter. It's not made in the long bones as modern medicine has thought. It is made in the intestinal tract under conditions of eating from foods that you've eaten. And then when you're not eating, blood is still made as a result of your intestinal flora production, producing a whole array of vitamins and minerals, and a whole array of everything is produced from your intestinal flora in here. And did you know that this intestinal flora in here, when you don't eat, it's producing 26 grams of protein in the average person a day? It produces 26 grams. Did you know that the average person requires about 26 grams of protein to get through the day and for their reconditioning of your body and everything? It's so amazing that our body is designed that the intestinal flora that's within produces exactly the amount of protein that's necessary for you to get through the day. If you didn't have any, you're producing it. Did you know that coenzyme Q10, vitamin C, and all these vitamins and minerals are produced inside the gut by your intestinal flora? Did you know there's not a single nutrient that you actually have to bring in this way, and that your intestinal flora produces all that's necessary? And that's unbeknownst to people in modern medicine. They haven't even considered how vital and important the intestinal tract is. When you go to a doctor out there, what is the primary thing that you get given?
Prescription.
Prescription of antibiotics. That's right. Antibiotics happen to be the most primary thing that's actually prescribed for everything, isn't it? And it's amazing because those antibiotics, they tend to kind of really wipe out everything friendly in here as well as everything unfriendly. Whereas a herbal formula can get rid of all the dysbiotic bacteria, allow your friendly ones to remain. It can get rid of all the dysbiotic mold, fungus and yeast and allow the friendly mold, fungus and yeast to remain. We're meant to have element in our diet to assist our blood. We have blood-borne inhibitors that block the expression of the blood transmutating itself into a bacteria. There was a fellow who, his name is Riley, in 1958, who did an experiment and showed, a French doctor, and showed that if we take lung tissue and we just stress that lung tissue, it will break down into tuberculosis bacillus. There was no inoculation necessary. If we took a nerve that's innervated onto the stomach, intestinal tract, and we stressed that nerve and it innervated on the cell of the intestinal tract, that cell of the intestinal tract, healthy as it was before it began, would transmutate itself into a typhoid bacillus, a dysentery type of bacillus. No, it was not necessary for anything to be inoculated from the outside for the body to break down into mold, fungus and yeast. Are you understanding? Are you understanding? If we take a piece of paper, if I take a piece of paper and I get it wet and put it in a little warmth, did you know that if you observe it, the paper itself will break down into mold, fungus and yeast? For 2 hours, only 2 hours, at room temperature. But then we look at the potato, you'll be shocked to notice that the starch granule of the potato itself is converting itself into a bacteria. Did you know that multiple sclerosis and all these conditions and things, I'm probably the foremost expert in the world in blood formation, and many years ago I learned I could look at somebody's blood and I could tell if somebody had multiple sclerosis or what condition was because I could tell the characteristics of the blood. and all I would do was change the characteristics of the person's blood and it would heal them up from multiple sclerosis. And that was one of the very first conditions we had very great success with. There's very few doctors that could stand in front of you and say they've assisted people heal themselves from cancer. I don't know if there's anybody at the show here, honest to God, who knows and can tell you exactly what cancer is. And I don't know if there's anybody who's standing before you who actually has people who have cleared away cancer and have worked with herbs to assist to help clear cancer away. Now, when you get nutrients, most of these nutrients have been grown in a farmer's field, and it can have 2,000% less nutrient in it than actually something that is scrawny looking, you know, and it grew up in the mountains in the desert a bit, and it had to weep a little bit itself, and it cried a little bit, you know, because it didn't completely have all the work it was necessary maybe, or fully did, but it was much more powerful, it was much, much stronger. It had 2,000% more element than the rosemary grown in an organic garden. Did you know that all foods that we eat today have become more and more reduced in its biophotonic nature? I'm the only person probably in America that has written about biophotons, and the only person in America as a physiologist that's sort of really understanding about blood and how it has an anti-gravity effect and how it's a transporter of light, how it's a transporter of electricity. Blood is much more than just a gas transporter. Are you getting the picture? Yes? To just say that it's a gas transporter is really missing the bus. Oh my God, it's terrible. It's like we're not really observing what we should be observing. We should really be paying attention to the quality of a person's blood. That's so very important. Just like our sun is not exploding or imploding. No such thing. Isn't that amazing? Most people don't know that. Did you know that the sun is electric? And it's fed by galactic current. And it is a huge anode, the largest anode in the space around us, and the vast expanse of space beyond the sun acts as a virtual cathode ray, and galactic currents are fed from that into this center, and it's an enormous amount of electric arcs all together. That's what the sun is. It happens to be much, much hotter, a couple hundred miles above the surface of itself than it is on the surface or in its core, which is really cool in comparison. It has anomalies which can be explained as a result of it being considered as it is electric in nature. Did you know that blood is electric? Did you know that everything around us is actually the sum of electromagnetic energy and is electric? All physical matter that we see around us is actually made up out of whirlpools, little pinprick portals in the ether. Well, anyway, it's a very, very exciting time that we live. You've come and you've heard that blood is not made in the long bones, but actually made in the intestinal villi in health, and that cells of your body that are not vital, the body can break that material down into blood and does so as necessary when a state of autolysis is triggered, where you trigger a debulking of the body. This year we feature much bigger in the show, so I really would care very much that you can come and learn about the biophotonic nature of the herbs and things and what we're doing, and it's sort of really non-surgical, non-druggist approach to assisting people heal. But you would go around the show here and see that there's an enormous array of product and things which really the persons who've invented that haven't thought of nature. The people who invented those products, they did not think of the colloidal protein chaperone that's necessary to transport this to your heart, to your liver, to your brain, to your kidneys, to your urethra, ovaries, to your testes, gastrointestinal tract. Vast majority of people who design product, they never thought in terms of protein colloidal chaperone. They've never thought in terms of life force, and they have not thought in terms of a biophotonic nature. They have not thought either in terms of what is upstream versus downstream cleaning. They haven't really thought also of how that nutrient can actually be transported in your blood. So the vast majority of products out there are designed by people who have not thought of the things I've just mentioned. These are major distinctions that I'm drawing that's to do with the quality of things that we end up with and what would be the reason why we would do this. But did you know that when you eat food which is not quite right, and if you had some herb on one side and herb on the other side of what you've eaten, that it's going to move it through your intestinal tract. It's only going to remain in your intestine for 12 hours at the most, and it's going to save you. If you ate things which was not right, then you could do something that assists to evacuate. I was on popular Texas radio last weekend on Saturday on WBLJ Talk Radio Texas, and that goes all over Texas. And I had people calling me up, you know, and then sometimes on the air, you know, someone's asked me some questions and things, and I said, hey, I think you know more about actually looking after your car than you look after your body, right? The person said yes. They actually know how to look after their car far better than they know how to look after their body. And here's what this person was asking me: would it be all right, figuratively? I mean, he didn't say it this, but metaphorically, it would be like me saying to you, would it be okay that I put sugar in the petrol? I mean, you know, I'll put sugar in the petrol. The engine's not working really well, but I'm looking around for some more octane. See, that's just not going to work. We've got to really do what we can to learn how can we improve our blood. The success that we have in assisting people heal is by assisting transform the blood into becoming more vital, and as a result of your blood being more vital, the cells of your body function properly, and the endocrine glands, which when somebody kind of been sluggish and they really were tired and you couldn't get up a set of stairs and things, and that's because, gosh, you're missing the minerals that's necessary to have a full pulse in your blood. You've eaten things which is robbed minerals. You've done things, you've exercised, you've done all sorts of things, you've sweated, you did all sorts of things, and you less than were able to keep the minerals, you know, sufficient, and you were unable, your intestinal flora was unable to produce an array of minerals enough under the stressful condition. And so then, little by little, mineral and all sorts of elements starts to be robbed from the body and not kept fully. But if this is interesting to you, I would recommend that you would begin by considering, how can I clean my blood? And the primary organ that cleans the blood is the liver. That's right. The liver is the primary organ cleaning the blood. And so now, most people, you know, God, I think that most people have eaten bread, haven't you? I mean, I've eaten bread, everybody's eaten bread. And maybe you're still eating bread. I'm still having a little bit of bread occasionally. You know, it's like little pita bread. Terrible. But I'm so addicted. But I do what I can not to eat. And I recommend that you do what you can not to eat as well. But to do things in a way that's within your comfort. If you just let food go, that just won't be right. Honest to God, could just keel over. That won't be right. You've got to have a broom and things like that, and there's a way to go about things where you could move more towards calorie restriction. But I went without food for 10 years, and I lived on tea and honey, but I really didn't live on tea and honey. That was something that I enjoyed a bit, that's it. But after 3 or 4 days of actually really going on the road and not really sleeping and everything, I'd start to get a bit worn out, and then I'd rest for a few days and I'd be right again, you know. And this went on for some long time, And eventually I found myself doing a course that was search and rescue training to search for and organise search and rescue to find people at sea. And that's like a 3.5 month sort of a training, a specialist training, emergency medical technician, and training for a person actually how to run a search and rescue operation at sea and how to find bodies under the water. So I was doing this training, and sometimes I was so down deep in the water doing this training, and I was in the water on average for 5 or 6 hours every day. And so I was slowly becoming more and more exhausted, and finally when I was going down deep in the water, all my muscles and my legs started to cramp. And now I had exhausted myself, and a day or so passed and I really didn't recover much. I went to go in and get in the water again, and I really couldn't. And so now, since then, that was 2004, I started to, October 2004, I started to do calorie restriction, and I started to do a broth. And I did that broth whilst I was there, and that assisted me to get through the training, and I sort of have done a broth ever since, but not necessarily every day. But we are designed for food to be suspended, and we are designed for our intestinal tract to rest. And when is your intestinal tract resting? After you've defecated, before you eat again. That's the only time. So actually, when food's in the intestinal tract, it's not really resting, and that is so very, very important actually that your intestinal tract has the opportunity to rest. And it's only resting as a result of you having defecated everything out as it can be, and then nothing is brought in here except to hydrate, and time passes whilst it's resting. And that is your rest. It doesn't rest at night. Or if you've got nothing in there, then it's going to rest. But most people actually have something perhaps, and it's not really resting. So the rest occurs, of course, in English by not breaking your fast. That word is only like 370, 380 years old, that word, break fast. We never had a word like that before, you know, in German and English. Break fast. Break fast came because when we started to have ice, and it was the Industrial Revolution, and there was these people and they were wheeling ice in wheelbarrows with a little bell on it in the morning. And if you were rich, you had an ice box in your home, and you got a block of ice, and then you had this ice box. And it was only once we got these ice boxes that the younger ones were waking up in the morning, rubbing their eyes, rushing down to the ice box, opening it up, and tucking into things in there. And the older people would get up and say, "Oh my God, you're breaking your fast." And then the young ones would say, "Yeah." And so it got the name break fast. But it does show you the name that breaking your fast might not necessarily be good, especially if it's done too soon. Brunch is the way to go. And so, was this interesting for you to learn a bit about blood? Yeah? Yes? Yeah? Yeah. Every time we have this show, every time we ever come together, I do everything I can to do something that I have not done. I look to see what has been done, and I do everything I can to make something brand new for you, brand new, that you could come and you can be the first persons in your field to know things that are shared. So I do everything I can to kind of keep you on the edge of your seat and to keep you abreast of really the most current thing. There's so much that it's possible for us to be aware of that people really don't, and so I really do encourage you to come and be part of things as we go forward into the show, that we have some really great things that's coming up. Also too, just there might be a few questions.
You were about to tell us who was the physiologist who wrote about Bio Photons.
Okay, so Bio Photons have been written about in German, but there's not anything, no one else in English that I know of that's written anything, you know, in this area of Bio Photons at all.
What's the name of the German physiologist?
If you look up Bio Photon, you're going to look up that on the internet. I know I'm being asked to stop. Another question. Okay.
What do you recommend to strengthen your body electrically?
Okay, what do I recommend to strengthen our body? The primary thing I would recommend are things that actually mineralize ourselves, and that the minerals got to come from a living cell. It's got to be like sun-dried salt, not rock ground up, from a mountain. That's not food, and it's not salt either. I would recommend that people are lymphocyzing and that you're doing what we can to reduce what we have within here and assist to help to create evacuation and bring things in that actually has light, and then that's going to assist to help bring light into your body. If you bring things in that's dead, like an aspirin, for instance, or a piece of bread, you're going to urinate away your light, you see. So we could bring light in. Okay.
Any thoughts on this theory that AIDS is a cross between a sheep and business virus? And also about bird flu, cross-species jump. Okay,
so now I'll just share something with you. First of all, bird flu does come from flesh of the animal of a bird. And now all flu viruses are related to birds. And if you have flu, then it is related to chickens and things you've eaten on that nature. If you don't really get the flu, it is because you don't eat chickens. Now, if you have influenza, then the influenza type of organisms that ends up, that is something that's sort of a little bit, the closest species that have the influenza is dogs. Tuberculosis and pox-like kinds of conditions and things, all tuberculosis and pox-like conditions relates to cows. Food that people eat can become composed within the body as a tattoo, and when the body breaks down, that tattoo can break down too, and it breaks down into the organism that actually you ate, that organism was composed of itself. And so there is no such thing as an AIDS virus. One of my colleagues is Peter Duisberg. He's the top retrovirologist in the world. There was no such thing as retrovirology before he discovered this. That's Peter Duisberg. I was here in the city when Robert Gallo, got all the press and had a press release about AIDS being a virus. That was the first time in history of the country that actually a scientist had got a publishing of material through the press, not through research journals. There is no such scientific evidence that any virus exists like that at all, and there is not a single shred of scientific evidence to show that virus does anything at all, and that there is no such thing as that virus. It's continuously something that is changing, and if you have a flu shot, which I would not recommend, they're poisonous, all shots, but if somebody did and then you get tested for AIDS, it's more than likely you're going to show that you've got AIDS after the flu shot, because what they're looking for is an AIDS-related complex, and after you've had a flu shot, your immune system's going to not look as good as what it might ordinarily look. But AIDS is made up. There is no such thing as that being contagious. That's absolute rubbish. Other people heard that too? Have you heard that? You have? Yeah. Okay.
Also, the tests vary.
The tests are completely fraudulent, utterly fraudulent, and the people who are making money off that, they're just getting a fat wallet, and they are committing fraud on us. That is fraud, absolute fraud, no question about it. All the tests and the people who invented the test, the Western blot, the ELISA, and the polymer chain reaction, they're the PCR tests. They're the three types of tests in the world for testing for apparently having a condition like that, and all three inventors say it is not a test for AIDS. Anyway, look, I love you guys. We've been asked to stop. Maybe somebody else is coming in here. I love you. Have a wonderful, wonderful show here for New Life. Thank you very much.